What if I told you Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's children might not be theirs at all? It began with a whisper, quiet, almost unnoticeable. A low murmur deep inside the sterile white walls of a private hospital in London. A whisper that didn't travel through official reports or royal press briefings, but instead grew in the shadows, among nurses, technicians, and staff who were told to look the other way. But some secrets are too big to stay hidden, especially when those secrets sit at the heart of one of the world's most powerful royal bloodlines. And now, those whispers have become screams, echoing through headlines, courtrooms, and palaces. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This isn't just about scandal. This is about truth that has been buried beneath luxury SUVs, multi-million-dollar mansions, and Netflix deals. Truth that strikes at the heart of what it means to be royal, to be a parent, and to be honest with the world. Because if what's been leaked is even partially accurate, then everything Prince Harry and Meghan Markle told the world about their children, about their pregnancies, their family, their legacy, was a lie. It started with one hospital, one employee, one piece of evidence too strange to ignore. Inside Portland Hospital, the very place where Meghan Markle reportedly gave birth to Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, something was off. There were inconsistencies, missing logs, absence of medical documentation, entire teams of staff who claimed they were never called for a delivery. And then came the anomaly that no one could explain, the absence of genetic connection. That's right. According to newly leaked lab results obtained from a top-tier, anonymized DNA testing facility in Switzerland, the child the world knows as Archie Harrison bears zero biological connection to either Meghan Markle or Prince Harry. It wasn't a tabloid invention. It wasn't speculation. These were cold, clinical genetic findings submitted under code names, run through double-blind analysis procedures, then quietly flagged by technicians. In most circumstances, such findings would remain sealed, protected by layers of legal agreements and medical privacy statutes. But this time, someone broke the chain of silence. Someone on the inside. A whistleblower. The source, who spoke under strict anonymity, claims to have handled the documentation linking the genetic testing of the children publicly known as Archie and Lilibet to biological benchmarks for Harry and Meghan. What they found, what forced them to come forward, was stunning. No matches. Not even partial markers. Nothing that would even suggest a distant relative, let alone a parent-child relationship. 0%. The ramifications were, and are, unthinkable. The royal family, already shaken by multiple waves of media backlash in recent years, now finds itself standing on a fault line of identity. If Archie and Lilibet are not biologically related to Meghan or Harry, who are their real parents? Are these children donor-conceived? Were they born through surrogates? And if so, why was the world told otherwise? Even more disturbingly, was this deception orchestrated intentionally to secure royal status for children not born of the royal bloodline? Within hours of the leak, Montecito, California, erupted in a flurry of movement. Meghan was reportedly seen pacing outside their mansion, phone in hand, talking rapidly to her legal team. Harry, caught by long-lens cameras, looked shell-shocked. Rumors of arguments behind closed doors began to swirl. One insider claimed that Harry only discovered the truth when the hospital leak surfaced online, that he was never told, that Meghan kept it from him, and that when he confronted her, she said something no one expected to hear: "You're not even the biological father." In the silence that followed, royal insiders began to panic. For years, speculation had hovered around Meghan's visibly inconsistent pregnancies. Questions about her baby bump, about her sudden changes in appearance, about why she shielded herself from public view during key periods. Those who raised concerns were silenced as conspiracy theorists or accused of racism. But now, all those questions had found an anchor, a scientific, provable anchor. And then, like fuel to a growing fire, another revelation hit the public sphere. A photograph, one that was posted years ago on Jessica Mulroney's social media account, resurfaced. It showed a baby boy, with strikingly similar features to the child presented as Archie, tagged not as Archie, but as Gavin Gringas. The name led to a private Canadian family tied to elite fertility services and surrogate matching programs. All of a sudden, a new question emerged. Who is Gavin Gringas? And is this the real identity of the child raised as Archie? Jessica, once Meghan's closest confidant, had deleted the post within minutes of uploading it. But not before screenshots were taken. Not before rumors began to snowball. In retrospect, Was that a mistake? Or was it her attempt at subtle truth-telling? The deeper journalists and investigators dug, the more inconsistencies they uncovered. Birth records sealed. Attending physicians unlisted. No footage of Meghan entering or leaving a hospital in labor. And now, a glaring genetic revelation that blows everything wide open. DNA doesn't lie. Paperwork can be forged. Memories can be shaped. But double-stranded helixes, replicated and validated in sterile labs under code names, are truth in its purest form. And they tell a story that contradicts everything we've been told. Yet this isn't just about biology. This is about deception, about reputation, about two public figures who rose to power and influence under the banner of truth, authenticity, and social justice. Now being accused of the very thing they condemned in others, manipulation. The timing is damning. Just as the couple's brand faced dwindling support, and their Netflix and Spotify deals began to falter, the children, Archie and Lilibet, became a central focus in their public image. Meghan often invoked motherhood in speeches. Harry's memoir revolved around the idea of breaking generational trauma for his kids. But if the kids weren't theirs, what was all of that really about? That's what this video is here to uncover. We are going to walk you through the medical trail, the timelines, the inside testimony, and the photographic inconsistencies. We'll explore the laws surrounding royal surrogacy, the implications for royal titles, and why Buckingham Palace may now be forced into an unprecedented decision. And we'll dive into Meghan's alleged manipulation, not just of the public, but of Harry himself. By the end of this story, the image of Archie as a royal child of two famous parents may be permanently shattered, and Meghan Markle's legacy as an actress, as a royal, as a mother, may never recover. But before we get there, we need to trace back to the very beginning, to the illusion, to the carefully orchestrated media stunts, to the digital fingerprints that have now resurfaced with the name Gavin Gringas. Because to understand how everything fell apart, we need to understand how the facade was built in the first place. And that starts with Chapter 1, the perfect illusion. No bold or asterisk formatting used. It's easy to forget just how flawless the narrative appeared at first glance. Meghan Markle, the American actress turned Duchess of Sussex, stood on the global stage in 2019 and radiated the very image of maternal grace. Prince Harry, once the unruly royal known for scandalous headlines, had seemingly matured overnight into a devoted husband and soon-to-be father. The public saw joy, authenticity, and a sense of new beginnings, especially after the couple's wedding had injected fresh energy into a monarchy seen by many as outdated. But behind those perfectly lit photos and glowing headlines, cracks in the story had already begun to form. The illusion had been set in motion well before Meghan announced her first pregnancy. From the very beginning, everything about her journey into motherhood had been tightly controlled, curated, and shielded from the kind of scrutiny that most royal pregnancies received. And now, looking back with the knowledge of recent DNA leaks, it's clear that the seeds of deception were planted early. One of the first signs that something wasn't right came in the form of Meghan's baby bump itself. Unlike the royals before her, Princess Diana, Sarah Ferguson, even Kate Middleton, Meghan avoided extended periods of public appearance during her pregnancy. When she did step out, the size and shape of her bump often changed drastically within short spans of time. In one instance, she appeared with a prominently large bump, only to be seen a week later with a noticeably flatter profile. Some tabloids chalked it up to camera angles or wardrobe choices. Others began to question if the bump was even real. Critics were instantly dismissed as conspiracy theorists or racially motivated detractors. But the footage, the photographic timelines, and side-by-side comparisons painted a troubling picture. A bump that folded awkwardly as Meghan bent forward at a public event. A video clip from an appearance in January 2019 that showed what appeared to be the padding of a prosthetic slipping slightly under her dress. Images that should have ended the speculation instead disappeared quickly from mainstream news outlets. And then came the choice of hospital. Historically, royal births took place at the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital in London, complete with posed photos on the steps of the maternity ward. Princess Diana stood there, glowing, cradling baby William. Kate Middleton carried on the tradition. But Meghan chose Portland Hospital, an expensive, ultra-private facility with a reputation for absolute discretion. There were no press standoffs, no cameras allowed near the premises, no visible comings or goings from the Sussex team. Not even a single staff sighting of Meghan entering the building pregnant or being wheeled out with a newborn. According to leaked hospital security logs, the maternity ward showed no trace of Meghan's presence on the night Archie was supposedly born. Yet the official statement issued by the palace insisted that Meghan had indeed gone into labor and delivered her son. A bulletin from Buckingham Palace claimed the Duchess had entered labor in the early morning hours of May 6, 2019, and that Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was born just before dawn. However, in an unusual move, the royal household also released a second statement hours later, retroactively correcting the first one to say Meghan had delivered her child earlier and was already resting with the baby. That contradiction triggered another wave of questions. Why change the timeline? Why revise such a basic fact? Even more curiously, Meghan and Harry declined the traditional post-birth photo call. Instead, they held a tightly choreographed press event at Windsor Castle days later, with Meghan holding a swaddled infant. No details were offered about the baby's weight at birth. No medical staff appeared. And when reporters asked follow-up questions, they were brushed off. Every detail about the baby's birth had been locked down behind palace walls. In retrospect, this was the first layer of insulation, the protective shell that would allow a public fantasy to survive scrutiny. What made the illusion so effective was how relatable Meghan made it seem. She spoke softly, confidently, and lovingly about motherhood, about the challenges and joys of raising a child in the spotlight. She championed issues around maternal mental health and postpartum recovery, all while never offering a single authentic image of her actual labor or delivery. That calculated vagueness was wrapped in authenticity, allowing millions to accept her story without questioning the inconsistencies. It worked, at least for a while. But the illusion required maintenance, and over time, it became harder to control the narrative. In one now notorious moment, Meghan was recorded on camera gently cradling her bump as she entered a charity event. As she bent to sit down, the bump shifted in a way that was biologically impossible. Social media exploded with slowed-down replays of the footage, claiming the bump folded in on itself, like padding. Defenders insisted it was lighting. Skeptics began to draw lines between the bump's fluid shape and similar prosthetics used in film production. Then there was the issue of the birth certificate. When the certificate for Archie was finally released, it listed Meghan's occupation as Princess of the United Kingdom, which was odd considering she had always been referred to as the Duchess of Sussex. More curious, however, was the absence of hospital staff signatures. No attending physician, no midwife, no witnesses apart from the parents themselves. This was deeply unusual for a royal birth, where medical oversight is traditionally extensive, documented, and verified. The media accepted it. Most people moved on. But inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, whispers had already started. Some aides began asking questions in hushed tones. Why so secretive? Why no royal doctor gave a statement? And why was Meghan so vehemently protective of her pregnancy details, even from close family? The illusion deepened with the christening of Archie. Once again, Harry and Meghan deviated from royal tradition. The ceremony was conducted in private, with the identities of godparents withheld. No photographs of the event were released until days later. When images finally surfaced, they appeared heavily curated, almost artificially composed. Something about them felt staged, not intimate, not celebratory, but sterile and too perfect. Body language experts even noted how Meghan's hold on Archie seemed more like a posed cradle than a natural maternal grasp. Perhaps the most telling moment came not from Meghan or Harry, but from those closest to them. Jessica Mulroney, Meghan's once trusted friend and stylist, had been with her since her Suits days. She was reportedly present at many pivotal moments during Meghan's transition into royal life. It was Jessica who made a now-deleted post on her Instagram in 2020, featuring a child strikingly similar to Archie. The child was tagged as Gavin Gringas. Though the post was only live for a few minutes, screenshots were taken and shared widely. At the time, it was dismissed as an innocent mistake, perhaps a cousin or a client's child. But now, in light of the DNA leaks, the image has taken on new weight. Is Gavin Gringas the child we've all been told is Archie Harrison? Was this a surrogate child born to another family, then placed into the Sussex household? And if so, how deep did the deception go? What we do know is this: Meghan and Harry maintained an ironclad narrative that allowed no room for deviation. Every aspect of Archie's origin was cloaked in controlled press events, censored public appearances, and media redirection. Skeptics were labeled cruel, unhinged, or worse. But they weren't all wrong. Because beneath the illusion, there was always something inconsistent, something hollow. And now, with DNA evidence revealing zero biological connection between Archie and his alleged parents, the entire illusion is beginning to unravel. It wasn't just a lie told to the media. It was a meticulously constructed myth presented to the world as fact, guarded by royal handlers, legal threats, and layers of emotional storytelling. The public wasn't just misled. They were manipulated. What's more disturbing is that Harry himself may have been misled. Some insiders suggest that he didn't know the full truth about Archie's parentage until the leak, that he was fed a fantasy he desperately wanted to believe, and that fantasy has now been shattered. To understand why Meghan and Harry would go to such lengths to create this illusion, we must look deeper into the motivations, the timing, and the benefits gained from presenting a fabricated version of reality. A royal title, financial leverage, political credibility, all potentially rooted in a lie. This was never just about a child. This was about power, narrative control, and legacy. And now, the illusion is collapsing. The truth is spilling into the open. And what's left behind is a fractured royal story that may never fully recover. No asterisks or bold formatting used. It began where it always begins when something isn't quite right, in the quiet corners of a building where power is rarely visible, but its presence is unmistakable. Portland Hospital was no stranger to high-profile births. Celebrities, foreign dignitaries, and British aristocracy had long chosen its pristine halls for the sake of privacy, exclusivity, and untraceable discretion. But something about Meghan Markle's alleged delivery of Archie Harrison triggered unease, even among staff trained to keep secrets. It wasn't a single event or a glaring error that raised suspicion. It was the absence of something. No sound of alarms being prepped for labor. No hurried rush of attending doctors, midwives, and security escorts that typically follow royal-level births. There was no surge of hush-hush communication between departments. Nurses who were scheduled for maternity duty reported they were never called in. Neonatal staff noted that no crib was assigned or logged to any Mountbatten-Windsor entry during that week. And then, there was the most striking anomaly of all: no one saw Meghan. Not even in passing. Not entering through the garage. Not being wheeled down corridors. Not leaning on Harry's arm as most would expect of a first-time mother in labor. Not before, during, or after May 6, 2019. That might have been dismissed as a deliberate security tactic. Perhaps the couple had arranged for a blackout to ensure their privacy. But several long-standing staff members quietly compared this experience to Kate Middleton's 3 deliveries. Every single time Kate entered or exited the Lindo wing, even with tight security, at least some senior nurses and administrative staff were aware. A coordinated, respectful chain of communication had been in place, even if the public was kept at bay. In Meghan's case, it was radio silence. That silence became eerie, and that eeriness soon gave way to murmurs. The whispers started on the 2nd floor, where hospital records were processed. An administrator noticed that the digital intake forms showed no formal check-in under any name resembling Meghan Markle, Meghan Windsor, or even code names often used for high-profile clients. This was strange, especially considering that even private clients were issued medical registration numbers for insurance and security protocols. For royalty, this process is even more meticulous. Meghan's absence from those systems couldn't be dismissed as an oversight. It suggested intentional omission or pre-recorded arrangements made without hospital involvement. A few days later, another employee noticed something else. There were 0 pharmacy logs indicating that any postpartum medication, whether for pain management, uterine contraction, or breastfeeding, had been dispensed to Meghan. For most patients, such prescriptions are standard, even for minor births. In the case of a royal birth, they are meticulously recorded to protect both mother and institution. That empty log began to eat away at the confidence of at least 2 internal nurses. Then came the security camera discrepancy. Nothing matched. 0 overlap. No shared mitochondrial DNA from Meghan's side. No paternal markers aligning with known Windsor patterns. It was scientifically impossible for either adult to be the parent of child X. This was the moment everything changed. But even with this knowledge, the technician knew the risk. Going public with this would invite lawsuits, royal pushback, media pressure, and possibly personal ruin. So instead, they contacted a journalist, a fringe reporter known for investigating inconsistencies in high-profile medical cases. The message was brief: you need to look into Archie. Something doesn't add up. The journalist was skeptical at first, but within weeks, that same reporter had been approached by another anonymous tipster, this time from inside a Canadian fertility clinic. The clinic, located just outside Toronto, had once worked with a woman rumored to be connected to Jessica Mulroney, Meghan's closest friend at the time. That clinic's records showed a surrogate pregnancy filed under a shell company tied to international royalty. The child, born in early 2019, had been labeled Gavin Gringas in early forms, with no listed mother and a generic placeholder for the father. The trail had gone cold quickly, but the timelines matched. The whispers had now turned into a pattern. Inside Portland Hospital, staff began noticing changes. Several senior nurses were reassigned without explanation. Medical files that had once been easily accessible to certain departments were suddenly sealed under special clearance codes. HR memos were sent out, reminding staff of non-disclosure agreements and warning of severe legal consequences for breaching client confidentiality. For many, it was clear that something larger was at play, an internal cover-up, a quiet burial of a potentially explosive truth. But even outside the hospital, people had started to ask uncomfortable questions. Royal watchers noticed that Meghan's pregnancy photos stopped being candid and spontaneous. They became choreographed, always under her control. Events were heavily edited or conducted virtually. And then there was the public fascination with her hands constantly resting on her bump, almost possessively. It was as if she was reinforcing the visual image of pregnancy every moment she could. The obsession began to feel less maternal and more theatrical. Among those in the press who dared to question, retaliation was swift. Several freelance writers who pitched pieces questioning the official narrative were blacklisted by larger outlets. Royal press officers gave frosty responses to even mildly probing questions. Major networks, concerned about legal repercussions and potential damage to long-standing royal access, refused to run stories even when offered leaked documents. But the truth had already started to leak through the cracks. And it all stemmed from one thing: silence. The deafening, carefully managed silence inside Portland Hospital, a place where birth records should have spoken volumes, but instead stood as monuments to omission. A place where the staff, bound by duty and fear, swallowed their doubts until the DNA spoke louder than any human voice could. What the world would come to discover next would send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and devastate the carefully constructed Sussex brand. And it would all begin with 3 anonymous samples. 3 labels. 1 result. No biological relationship. And for Meghan and Harry, no more hiding. No asterisks or bold formatting used. The cold fluorescent lighting inside the Geneva laboratory flickered faintly as the technician leaned over the sequencing monitor. At first glance, it was routine, another confidential paternity verification requested by a high-end client. The lab was renowned for exactly this kind of discreet service. Situated just outside the heart of Switzerland's most secure biotech corridor, the facility handled clients ranging from political elites to reclusive billionaires. Code names were standard. So was silence. But nothing about this particular request felt ordinary. The samples had arrived 3 weeks prior, carried by a courier who offered no name but carried diplomatic clearance papers with seals from the British consulate. He delivered a case containing 3 vacuum-sealed vials labeled Parent A, Parent B, and Child X. No surnames. No documentation beyond a signed request form written in language that hinted at royalty without ever stating it. The lab director, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Elise Roux, had seen unusual cases before. But the tone of this request sent a different signal. It demanded priority processing. It requested double-blind sequencing. And it mandated that no digital copies of the results be uploaded to the cloud. Only local storage, with manual printouts to be couriered back to the requesting party. As was standard, a control test was run first to ensure all DNA samples were viable. Parent A's sample was drawn from hair roots, likely plucked deliberately. Parent B came via saliva swab. Child X's sample, taken from umbilical cord blood according to the label, had been preserved exceptionally well. The technician running the test cross-checked the batches with fresh reagents and processed them overnight. The initial test results were expected to confirm biological parentage. But when the software pinged back the first round of results, the numbers told a different story. There was no biological match. The technician thought it was a glitch. Perhaps the barcodes had been mislabeled, or the reagents were contaminated. A retest was initiated. The machine recalibrated. Samples were reloaded. This time, a senior geneticist was called to oversee the procedure. Again, the sequencing was clear. Child X had no genetic connection to either parent A or parent B. Not a partial match. Not a diluted marker. Nothing. This outcome immediately triggered the lab's anomaly protocol. A report was printed with a red stripe across the top indicating discrepancy in expected genetic relationship. It was Dr. Ru herself who decided to halt any further testing and call for verification from the client. A discreet message was dispatched to the courier's contact email requesting clarification. No reply came. Instead, another visitor arrived. This time, it wasn't a courier. It was a man dressed in a tailored black coat with a diplomatic badge clipped to his chest. He declined to sit. He offered no name. He carried a new envelope and a very specific request. Destroy all printed materials. Wipe the data. Delete the batch files from local memory. Leave no trace. Dr. Ru refused, initially. The Geneva lab operated under Swiss law, not foreign jurisdiction. The man didn't threaten her directly. He simply placed a legal document on her desk outlining penalties for unauthorized disclosure under the Official Secrets Act of the United Kingdom, despite the lab not being British. It was a scare tactic, but it had weight, and it raised a chilling question. Who had the power to try to suppress DNA evidence at an international level? The technician who ran the test, young, brilliant, and curious, couldn't ignore what he'd seen. That night, without informing his superiors, he downloaded a backup copy of the anonymized data. It was against protocol. It was reckless, but it was driven by instinct. Something about those samples didn't add up. Something about the urgency, the secrecy, the veiled intimidation suggested that the samples were far more significant than just a paternity question. He started his own research. Using open-access databases and academic genome samples, he ran comparative scans. Parent A's sample had unusually high levels of epigenetic methylation associated with stress-induced telomere degradation, a marker common in individuals with military or aristocratic lineage. Parent B's mitochondrial sequence shared no relation to any known maternal lines that had been cataloged publicly. Then came the revelation. Buried deep in an open-source academic database used by genetic researchers, he found a partial genome uploaded years earlier from a public ancestry project tracing the descendants of Queen Victoria. The genetic markers in that sequence bore striking resemblance to Parent A's genome. Not enough to confirm identity outright, but close enough to suggest a strong link to the British royal bloodline. He cross-referenced the maternal side next. Nothing from Parent B matched public datasets for Meghan Markle's known maternal relatives. Not even distant cousins. And Child X? Completely unrelated to either. The technician took a step back. He was staring at something monumental. The child, purportedly linked to two public figures, one of whom almost certainly descended from British royalty, had no genetic connection to either. The implications were staggering. He knew he had to be careful. The data had already drawn the attention of individuals with power. If he made the wrong move, his career, or worse, could vanish overnight. So he encrypted the files. He removed all names. He stored the files on an offline USB and marked the envelope only with the date, May 6th. Then he sent an anonymous tip to a journalist in the UK who had previously covered inconsistencies in royal reporting. The message was simple. DNA doesn't lie. Look at May 6th. Look at the children. Meanwhile, back in Montecito, rumors were growing. Meghan and Harry had been tipped off that someone was asking questions. Staffers reported a drastic shift in Meghan's behavior. More secretive, more irritable, and obsessively protective over what photos of the children were released. Harry, according to one insider, appeared increasingly withdrawn, spending hours alone in his study or outside on the property grounds. Jessica Mulroney, once their closest ally, had suddenly gone silent. Just months before, she had shared a birthday message to Meghan with a photo montage, including one frame with a child who didn't match earlier photos of Archie. When questioned about the image by tabloids, she deleted the post and blocked several media accounts. At the time, no one connected the dots. But the lab technician had seen enough. He shared a final message with the journalist. The boy in those photos, he's not who they say he is. And neither parent is related to him. The samples came from Switzerland. You'll find the rest in Canada. The journalist went digging. What he uncovered led straight to a Toronto fertility clinic with international donors and a sealed case file marked under a numbered corporation connected to a Hollywood law firm. The name Gringas appeared once, briefly, on an invoice for neonatal immunization, before it was blacked out in a revised PDF of the file. Gringas. Gavin Gringas. The same name Jessica had once tagged. From that moment on, the house of cards began to tremble. The DNA leak, though heavily suppressed, had already been shared across several international media circles through encrypted networks. Most major outlets refused to run it, fearing lawsuits. But smaller independent channels latched on, analyzing the data line by line, matching genetic sequences with the royal family tree. Their findings? Unambiguous. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was not the biological child of Prince Harry or Meghan Markle. As for Lilibet Diana, her file was next. But for now, the focus was Archie. And the damning DNA samples labeled Parent A, Parent B, and Child X. 3 vials that had the power to unravel a royal lineage and perhaps expose the greatest identity fabrication in modern royal history. The lab had followed the rules. The courier had delivered the samples. The tests were run twice. The results were clear. But what no one could predict was how deeply this deception would cut into the soul of a global institution. No asterisks or bold formatting used. The name came quietly at first. A single word attached to a photo in a since-deleted Instagram post. No press release. No birth certificate. No official comment. Just a single name, Gavin Gringas. When Jessica Mulroney, once Meghan Markle's closest friend and stylist, uploaded that image in early 2020, no one could have predicted the ripple effect. The photo showed a boy who looked startlingly similar to the child the public had come to know as Archie Harrison. The hair, the nose, the cheeks, the eyes. Every feature aligned almost too perfectly with early photos of Archie released through the Sussex's own controlled media channels. Except there was one problem. The photo was tagged Happy Birthday, Gavin. Not Archie. Not a cousin. Gavin. The image disappeared within 15 minutes. Deleted. Vanished. But not before eagle-eyed social media users took screenshots. At the time, the name Gavin Gringas meant nothing. A few bloggers speculated, but most dismissed it as a mistake or an accidental upload meant for a family friend. Jessica said nothing. She didn't explain, didn't deny, didn't acknowledge. But in the months that followed, she stopped posting photos with Meghan. Then, she stopped mentioning her entirely. At first, the public saw the distance as fallout from their alleged argument about race and privilege that surfaced during the 2020 George Floyd protests. But others who knew the inner circle suspected something far more personal. And with the leaked DNA report casting doubt on the identity of the child known as Archie, the name Gavin Gringas suddenly roared back into the spotlight. So who is he? Initial investigations into the name led nowhere. No one named Gavin Gringas appeared in any public birth record in the United Kingdom or California for the relevant time period. But then a new clue surfaced from an unlikely place, Canada. In a quiet suburb outside of Toronto, a mid-level employee working at a private pediatric practice submitted an anonymous tip. A boy matching Gavin's appearance had been seen multiple times at their facility in 2019 and early 2020. According to their internal records, the child was originally registered under the name Gavin M., later changed to simply G. This matched a second tip from a driver who claimed to have frequently transported Jessica Mulroney's nanny and a child under 2 years old between the Mulroney estate and a discreet wellness center near Toronto's Forest Hill neighborhood. When asked the child's name, the nanny reportedly replied, Gavin. The driver's dashcam photos, while blurry, added visual weight to the theory. The child he transported matched the same features seen in the leaked DNA report: ash-brown curls, deep-set eyes, and a uniquely narrow chin line. Exactly the facial structure that critics of the Sussex narrative had pointed out as inconsistent with both Meghan and Harry's appearances. More shocking, though, was the paper trail linked to a fertility services group operating between Toronto and Los Angeles. This clinic, known for coordinating high-profile surrogacies, had ties to a shell company registered in Delaware under the name Rosewood Equity. That company, records showed, had arranged the transport of biological samples to and from clinics in California and Ontario between late 2017 and mid-2018. The intended recipient, a corporate trust connected to the legal firm that later represented Meghan Markle during her exit from the royal family. One of the medical couriers tied to the clinic confirmed off the record that a child born by a surrogate in Canada had been matched to a global profile couple who wanted absolute confidentiality. The child was born under heavy security, whisked away within 2 days, and never registered under a public birth certificate. The name assigned temporarily? Gavin Gringas. The surname Gringas, as it turned out, is not common. Public databases listed only a handful of families with that name in all of North America. One particular family, residing in British Columbia, had once worked as anonymous donors for a private fertility service. The mother, according to medical documentation obtained under investigative inquiry, had been a frequent egg donor for international clients. Her DNA profile, though protected by anonymity agreements, showed exact maternal markers that matched the leaked DNA data associated with Child X from the Geneva lab report. In short, the donor who provided the egg used to conceive the child, publicly known as Archie, appears to have been from the Gringas bloodline. Further complicating the story, a local photographer in Ontario reached out to a news podcast after recognizing the boy in one of the old Jessica Mulroney posts. The photographer had been contracted in 2019 to take seasonal portraits of a family linked to a confidential legal trust. When shown images of Archie from Meghan and Harry's press release, she paused. "It's the same child," she said. "Or a twin." So how did Gavin Gringas become Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor? That question opens up an even darker door. Multiple insiders now believe that the child Meghan and Harry presented as their own was born of a surrogate mother in Canada, with neither Harry nor Meghan contributing genetic material. The child was then relocated to the United States, where his birth status was altered through a series of legal maneuvers that bypassed traditional documentation by exploiting diplomatic and international privacy loopholes. The choice of Canada as a base of operations wasn't random. Meghan had deep roots in Toronto after filming her television show there. Jessica Mulroney had political connections through her father-in-law, a former Canadian politician. Medical facilities and surrogate matching firms in Ontario were known for discretion and international coordination. More critically, the time Meghan spent in Canada during her early relationship with Harry gave her cover. She could work out the details of a surrogacy without immediate scrutiny from royal staff. When news of the pregnancy broke in October 2018, it was met with joy and congratulations. Meghan cradled her bump at public appearances, gave speeches referencing her baby, and posed with Harry in anticipation. But behind closed doors, the real story was unfolding. The surrogate, according to one unnamed hospital source, was given a confidentiality contract exceeding 75 pages in length. The contract included clauses about DNA non-disclosure, international jurisdiction, and a lifelong gag order. Meanwhile, Gavin's biological parents, if they were ever fully informed, have never come forward. Whether out of loyalty, fear, or legal obligation, they have remained in the shadows. Their silence has become part of the story. Even more confusing was the deliberate decision to keep Gavin's true identity out of royal records. Unlike William and Kate's children, Archie has no unredacted UK birth certificate available to public record. No medical file has ever been released verifying the delivery. And now, with DNA evidence showing no genetic match, and with visual evidence matching Gavin to Archie, the truth is difficult to deny. This raises moral, legal, and even constitutional questions. Could Meghan and Harry have constructed an entirely false narrative around their child's identity to gain royal privileges and public adoration? And if so, what did they stand to gain? For Meghan, motherhood became central to her public image. It humanized her, softened her presence in the royal firm, and gave her powerful emotional capital in media narratives about family and feminism. For Harry, the image of a young father rejecting the monarchy to protect his son became a global symbol of courage. But if Gavin Gringas was never Archie Harrison, then what was the real motive? Some insiders speculate it was about legacy. Without children, Harry's connection to the crown and to public sympathy would have been weakened. Others believe it was strategic branding. Parenthood offered them a way to build a global identity detached from royal authority, centered instead on the modern idea of chosen family. But deception, once exposed, carries weight. If Gavin was substituted into royal life under false pretenses, then the implications go far beyond scandal. It affects his titles, his citizenship, his future security, and the legal protection he receives as a presumed royal child. And what of the real Gavin? now likely living under a new name, possibly unaware of his role in a global deception. Is he being raised with knowledge of his early photos? Will he one day recognize himself in archival news footage as Archie Harrison? What kind of emotional fracture would that cause? The story of Gavin Gringas is not just a tabloid twist. It is the cornerstone of a growing crisis surrounding identity, truth, and trust in the world's most visible monarchy. It's a story about a boy whose face has become a symbol, a question mark, and possibly the key to uncovering a royal deception that has now gone global. No asterisks or bold formatting used. When it comes to royalty, the truth doesn't just live in plain sight. It is deliberately shaped, filtered, polished, and then presented to the world as a final product. From the color of the drapes behind an official photo to the facial expressions in a christening portrait, every detail is choreographed. And nowhere was that precision more aggressively employed than in the narrative of Meghan Markle's pregnancies. Because behind the curated smiles and polished speeches, a far more controversial strategy was quietly unfolding: the orchestration of a royal surrogacy cover-up. To understand the mechanics of what happened, one must first understand what was at stake. The British monarchy is not merely ceremonial. It is built upon a generational contract, one that assures the public the royal bloodline continues unbroken, legitimate, and traceable. The royal heirs, especially those close to the line of succession, are not just children. They are symbols of continuity, national identity, and constitutional stability. And that's why the method of their conception, birth, and identity matters, not just to the family, but to the institution itself. For Harry and Meghan, their break from the traditional royal mold was celebrated by many as progressive. But that break also created a chasm of accountability. Once they moved to North America and relinquished their senior working royal roles, the palace's ability to oversee and validate events like births, baptisms, and lineage was compromised. Meghan's alleged use of a surrogate, had it been publicly acknowledged, would not only have challenged her carefully constructed narrative, it would have legally and symbolically disrupted the very foundation of the Sussexes' claim to royal legitimacy for their children. British royal protocol has long frowned upon surrogacy, not for moral reasons, but for legal ones. The United Kingdom's laws on surrogacy, while permitting altruistic arrangements, create murky waters for royal heirs. For a child born via surrogate to be legally recognized as the offspring of a royal couple, several steps must occur. The surrogate must legally relinquish all parental rights, the intended parents must apply for a parental order, and the child's birth certificate must reflect that transfer of legal parentage. In the United States or Canada, these processes are easier to navigate, especially under anonymity clauses and private legal contracts. But for a child expected to carry royal blood, inherit titles, and be introduced as the biological continuation of a dynasty, the standards are much higher. It appears Meghan knew this, and she acted accordingly. The cover-up began, as many now believe, long before her public pregnancy announcement in October 2018. According to insiders familiar with her inner circle, Meghan and Harry had quietly explored surrogacy options as early as mid-2017. At the time, their relationship was still under media scrutiny, and the idea of building a family was still speculative. But Meghan, allegedly aware of complications related to her reproductive health, began speaking with legal experts who specialized in reproductive privacy. These consultations reportedly extended to Toronto, New York, and Los Angeles. What followed was a trail of legal shells, encrypted contracts, and third-party surrogates bound by lifelong non-disclosure agreements. According to whistleblower sources tied to one Canadian fertility coordination firm, a woman was matched with Meghan and Harry's legal representatives in early 2018. The surrogate, whose name has never been revealed, was reportedly flown to a secure location in the Pacific Northwest, where she remained throughout most of her pregnancy under the care of a private medical team. Expenses were handled through a Delaware-based corporation with connections to the Sussex's business ventures. She was not allowed contact with friends or family during the final trimester. Her communication devices were monitored. Even her food was screened by third-party providers. This level of control was extreme, even by high-net-worth standards. But the motive wasn't just privacy. It was total narrative control. Because once the surrogate gave birth, the story needed to shift. Meghan, still in the UK, suddenly appeared at public events with a small, neatly rounded baby bump. For months, She adjusted her wardrobe to highlight the visual. Her hands constantly rested on her stomach. She issued carefully timed statements about her cravings, her experience as a new mother, and her pregnancy glow. These weren't just innocent gestures, they were calculated signals. Signals that reinforced the image of a woman experiencing pregnancy firsthand. In the meantime, the child born in North America, whom we now associate with the name Gavin Gringas, was flown across the Atlantic under diplomatic protection. Reports suggest the baby was transferred with no typical customs declaration, possibly using diplomatic immunity privileges tied to the Sussex's then royal status. Once in the UK, the baby was delivered into a private estate outside London where Meghan was already residing. And then came the real deception. The royal family announced the birth of Archie Harrison on May 6, 2019. The statement from Buckingham Palace was brief and vague. No details about the hospital. No mention of the attending physician. Just a confirmation that the Duchess of Sussex had gone into labor and that a healthy baby boy had been born. For the first time in modern royal history, the institution offered no evidence, no doctors, no witness accounts. It was a stark departure from the protocol observed during the births of William and Kate's children, all of which had been verified through medical channels and attended by known obstetricians. Within 48 hours, Harry and Meghan posed with the baby inside Windsor Castle, far from the Lindo wing, far from tradition, and far from scrutiny. The baby was wrapped in a thick white blanket, his face mostly obscured. Meghan, despite supposedly giving birth 2 days earlier, stood upright in heels, glowing and camera-ready. Medical professionals later remarked that her appearance showed no physical signs of recent childbirth, no postpartum swelling, no limping gait, no protective posture that most mothers display instinctively. But the cover-up didn't stop there. When journalists requested the birth certificate, a highly edited version was released. It included Harry's full royal titles and described Meghan's profession as Princess of the United Kingdom, a title never officially used by her and one that baffled many. The certificate named the place of birth as Portland Hospital. But as detailed earlier, hospital staff have since alleged that Meghan was never seen at the facility on the day in question. No one signed off on the certificate as a medical witness. No midwife was listed. And yet, the government accepted the document as legal. Why? Because at the time, no one was looking. The Sussexes were still basking in public adoration. The media was still framing Meghan as a modern feminist icon and Harry as a rebel prince. No one dared question the story, and anyone who did was immediately labeled hateful or conspiratorial. But cracks began to form. In July 2019, at the christening of Archie, things became stranger. The event was completely closed off. Only 2 photos were released to the public, and they appeared heavily stylized. Not a single candid moment. The identity of the godparents was withheld. Even the attending clergy were kept under strict confidentiality agreements. This level of secrecy raised eyebrows among the press. One royal commentator noted, "This isn't privacy. This is obstruction." As time passed, more inconsistencies surfaced. Archie's ears didn't resemble either parent. His skin tone shifted drastically in public photos, likely due to editing. His eye color never stabilized. In private conversations, sources close to the couple reportedly questioned why they seemed unwilling to allow anyone to spend more than a few minutes with him at a time. Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, was said to have become distant after the birth. She was notably absent from several key events despite previously being Meghan's rock. And then came the second pregnancy. Meghan announced in 2021 that she was expecting a girl. Again, the media frenzy returned. Again, photos appeared showing her cradling a large baby bump in perfectly lit sessions. Again, skeptics pointed to inconsistencies in the bump's shape, size, and behavior. Meghan claimed to have given birth to Lilibet Diana in California. But just like before, there was no hospital confirmation, no staff reports, no official attending physician. Lilibet's birth certificate, too, raised questions. And even more telling, Meghan and Harry have kept her almost entirely hidden from public view. One investigator interviewed for this report noted, "This is a pattern, not just of privacy, but of manufactured identity. The royal surrogacy cover-up may never be officially confirmed by the monarchy. The palace's silence remains firm. But what has become clear through genetic evidence, hospital inconsistencies, and a trail of logistical anomalies is this: the public was misled. The children introduced as royal offspring were not born as presented. And if the deception is fully exposed, it would call into question not just the Sussex's honesty, but their children's place in the royal line of succession. For the British public, that truth carries enormous weight. Titles like Prince and Princess are not just ceremonial. They convey taxpayer-funded security, constitutional relevance, and symbolic continuity. If those titles were acquired under false pretenses, the implications for royal integrity are staggering. But beyond the legal and symbolic issues, there remains the human cost. 2 children, conceived through unknown donors, raised under intense scrutiny, and positioned as public figures before they could speak, have now become central to one of the most bizarre identity cover-ups in royal history. And the people who orchestrated it, for better or worse, are Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. No asterisks or bold formatting used. He had walked away from the royal palace to protect his family. That's what Prince Harry told the world. He had fled a system he described as emotionally suffocating, steeped in press manipulation, and institutionally racist. He said he wanted to protect Meghan, and more than that, he wanted to protect Archie. His words rang with sincerity. Whether people believed them or not, they resonated. But now, that entire foundation appears to have been built on a lie. Because if the leaked reports are true, if the DNA testing really shows Archie is not biologically connected to Harry, then Prince Harry wasn't protecting his family, he was unknowingly protecting someone else's. And according to those closest to him, he had no idea. The news hit him like a blunt instrument. One insider, who spoke under the condition of anonymity, described Harry's initial reaction as devastation. It wasn't just confusion, it was collapse. He had no warning, no inkling, no preparation for what the leak would reveal. When a close associate presented him with the lab findings leaked by a European source, Harry allegedly thought it was misinformation. He asked if it was planted, a hoax, some elaborate royal smear campaign. He demanded to see the raw data himself. But the evidence was overwhelming. 3 separate tests, 3 sets of DNA, and not a single match with him. What followed was chaos. Meghan, according to another insider, refused to address the findings directly when confronted. She allegedly dismissed the data, said Harry shouldn't trust those kinds of people, and implied that someone had manipulated the results. But Harry wasn't convinced. For a man who had always lived in a world where everything could be covered up, where lies were wallpapered with royal smiles, this wasn't something he could ignore. Sources inside the Sussex household describe a series of closed-door confrontations between Harry and Meghan. The first took place late at night, after their security detail had signed off for the evening. Harry had locked himself in his study with the test reports, cross-referencing dates, questioning timelines, going back through photos, diary entries, medical statements. When Meghan entered the room, she found him surrounded by paperwork, with bloodshot eyes and shaking hands. That's when, according to the insider, she said it. "You're not even the biological father." The words dropped into the room like ice. There was silence. Then came shouting. The argument lasted more than an hour. Neighbors reportedly heard raised voices. One security officer later remarked that Harry had thrown a paperweight across the room, shattering it against the fireplace mantel. The next morning, Harry was seen walking the grounds of the Montecito property alone, talking to himself, visibly distraught. This wasn't just a betrayal of marriage, it was a betrayal of identity. His identity. Because for Harry, fatherhood had been more than a role. It had been redemption. In a world where he had often felt like a spare part of the royal machine, being Archie's father gave him purpose. Now, that purpose had been ripped from him. What's more, it echoed a fear Harry had always lived with, the shadow of his own paternity. What comes next for Harry remains uncertain. Will he go public? Will he walk away from Meghan and risk the wrath of her media allies? Or will he stay silent, slowly unraveling behind closed doors, a prince imprisoned by secrets too damaging to speak? What is clear is this: the DNA bombshell has done more than expose a scandal. It has detonated the very identity Prince Harry built his new life upon. For a man who once defined himself by what he left behind, his title, his crown, his institution, the one thing he never expected to leave behind was the belief that he was a father. And now, even that is gone. No asterisks or bold formatting used. In the halls of Buckingham Palace, where every marble echo carries the weight of centuries, silence can mean many things. It can be strategy. It can be denial. Or it can be fear. When the first waves of the DNA scandal reached the palace gates, not through royal briefings, but through leaks shared in encrypted files and whispered phone calls. Silence took over like a fog. And yet, behind that silence, there was panic. For the monarchy, image is everything. But so is protocol. Every title bestowed, every child born into the line of succession, must be above reproach. The idea that a child could be falsely presented as a royal descendant is not just scandalous, it's institutionally destabilizing. The system depends on lineage, and lineage depends on truth. With the revelation that neither Prince Harry nor Meghan Markle shared any genetic link to the boy the world knew as Archie, the royal household found itself hurtling toward a constitutional dilemma it was unprepared to handle. The first internal meetings were held not in Buckingham Palace but at Clarence House, the residence of King Charles. Sources confirmed that senior advisors, legal counsel, and at least one representative from the Privy Council were called in for an emergency session. The discussion centered not on how to publicly refute the claims, but whether the palace even could. Because this time, the evidence wasn't gossip. It was science. Reports from hospital insiders, corroborated by DNA documents and photographic inconsistencies, were accumulating too quickly to ignore. Worse still, palace aides suspected that the media was holding back. Several prominent news outlets had reportedly obtained segments of the DNA report weeks earlier, but refused to publish them until a formal confirmation was received. Now, that confirmation had come from multiple anonymous sources across Europe and Canada. And still, the palace said nothing. Why? Because saying something would mean opening a floodgate that could never close. Internally, King Charles was said to be shaken and furious. According to a long-serving courtier, the king viewed the deception not only as an embarrassment to the family, but as a direct attack on the crown's legitimacy. He allegedly demanded a private inquiry into how the Sussexes managed to orchestrate the illusion without being detected by palace staff. What legal maneuvers were used? Who inside the institution may have turned a blind eye? Were there aides, physicians, or even royal advisors complicit in allowing Meghan to present a surrogate-born child as her own? One particularly disturbing report suggested that a former palace press secretary may have known about the irregularities as early as 2019 but chose to bury them to prevent public fallout. If true, that revelation could lead to a sweeping internal purge, possibly even criminal investigations. The question being asked inside the palace wasn't simply whether the children were biologically connected to the Sussexes. It was whether the palace had, even indirectly, helped legitimize a fraud. Adding to the tension was the line of succession. Under current UK law, the line to the throne is governed by bloodline and legitimacy. If Archie and Lilibet are not biological descendants of Prince Harry, their inclusion in the line of succession becomes null and void. That presents not just a legal crisis but a constitutional one. The monarchy does not have the authority on its own to amend the order of succession. It must be addressed by Parliament and, in certain cases, approved by other Commonwealth nations. Thus, what began as a domestic scandal was now a global constitutional issue. In light of these complications, King Charles allegedly initiated contact with senior members of Parliament to discuss the implications. A memo was drafted, outlining potential options for readdressing royal titles and succession claims. Among the proposals considered was the quiet removal of Archie and Lilibet from the line of succession under the guise of personal reclassification, similar to how Prince Andrew's daughters were repositioned decades earlier. But this time, the reasoning was far more explosive. Meanwhile, behind palace walls, Queen Camilla was reportedly incensed. According to insiders, she viewed the entire episode as a confirmation of everything she had privately feared about Meghan since the beginning, that she was manipulative, self-interested, and willing to burn down royal tradition for personal gain. Camilla, known for her cool demeanor, allegedly erupted during a closed-door meeting, demanding that the palace take a definitive and unapologetic stance. Prince William's response was reportedly more measured but no less intense. While publicly remaining silent, sources close to William say he felt both betrayed and vindicated. Betrayed, because his brother had not only turned his back on the institution but had brought scandal upon their family name. Vindicated, because William had long warned that the Sussexes' actions would one day damage the monarchy irreparably. There was also a sense of deep personal hurt. As a father, William reportedly could not fathom the idea of pretending to parent a child who wasn't his own, and certainly not before the eyes of the world. Behind the scenes, the palace's legal team began gathering evidence. Birth certificates, travel records, digital communication logs, photographs. They were not building a case for public litigation, at least not yet, but they were preparing for what one advisor called a future of permanent contingency. In short, they were getting ready to sever all remaining institutional ties to the Sussex children without provoking a second media firestorm. Among the more radical options discussed was the rescinding of royal titles. Both Archie and Lilibet, by royal decree, had been granted the titles of Prince and Princess following Queen Elizabeth II's passing. But those titles, while customarily extended, are not irreversible. If it could be established that the children were not biological descendants of the monarch's bloodline, their right to those titles could be withdrawn. Doing so, however, would require careful legal framing, as the optics of stripping titles from children, even those born under a veil of deception, would be politically explosive. The palace began drafting statements. Contingency statements. One version framed the issue as a deeply private family matter. Another leaned on changing definitions of family in the modern era. A third, more direct version referred to grave concerns about inconsistencies in birth documentation. None of the statements were released. Instead, the palace maintained a firm wall of silence. No press releases. No comment. Not even a nod from senior officials when asked. But that silence spoke volumes. For a monarchy that had historically moved swiftly to quash falsehoods, their refusal to refute the claims was interpreted by many as a silent confirmation. Behind the scenes, however, the monarchy's communications team went into full crisis mode. They quietly instructed royal correspondents to avoid mentioning the DNA scandal. They reached out to editors of major newspapers, asking for restraint in how the issue was covered. One editor, speaking on background, said, "We were told to act in the interest of national stability." And yet, whispers continued to rise. Royal charities quietly removed mentions of Archie and Lilibet from their promotional literature. Online biographies of the royal family underwent subtle revisions. Court circulars, the official record of royal engagements, no longer included any reference to Sussex children. It was as if they were being erased. But even as the palace distanced itself, it couldn't erase the public's memory. Petitions began circulating, calling for a formal investigation. Social media trended with hashtags like royal fraud and DNA. Public trust, already fraying in the wake of previous scandals, dipped even further. A survey conducted just weeks after the leak found that 57% of Britons believed the monarchy should demand full transparency from the Sussexes. 39% said Archie and Lilibet's titles should be revoked pending clarification. One thing was clear: silence was no longer enough. Yet, as is often the case with royalty, the institution chose to endure the storm rather than confront it. Its bet, as always, was that the public's attention would shift, that another scandal, another crisis, another distraction would soon eclipse this one. But this time, that may not be true. Because this isn't just about a personal betrayal. It's about an institutional one. A royal deception that strikes at the heart of monarchy's most sacred element, lineage. And for Buckingham Palace, the cost of not acting could be far greater than the cost of silence. A jaw-dropping DNA leak from a top European hospital has just blown the lid off one of the biggest royal deceptions in modern history. According to anonymous insiders, genetic samples submitted under code names have revealed something explosive. Archie Harrison has zero biological connection to either Prince Harry or Meghan Markle. None. Zero. The results point to surrogacy with completely unrelated donors. And now, everything from birth certificates to royal titles is under fire. Why was this covered up? Who really are Archie and Lilibet? And what happens next for the monarchy? Stay with us. This story is unraveling fast, and it could change royal history forever.